and then when they come up, weeds come up too. So you had to go out there and chop the weeds out manually. And then after the weeds were chopped out of the rows, then the tractor would come along and cultivate the rows.
Mhm.
And you did this one time. You did another go through again for weeds because there were some that were left behind. And then after the peanuts matured and they were ready to harvest, you'd go out there with a tractor and plow up the rows of peanuts. And this is all done. And after the peanuts were plowed up, then you had to go out there and manually take the peanuts and shake them with pitchforks or hands or whatever and make little piles for them to dry out there. And it took several days or a long period of time for them to dry out. They had to be pretty dry. And so once the peanuts were dried out, then you had to hire somebody. That we had a local farmer that had a machine. It was a stationary trashing machine, and they would put the machine up, and it was run by a belt driven from a tractor to turn the machine would run. And the process of getting the peanuts to the machine was all the neighbors would come and help, and they would load their wagons with the peanuts that were already dried in little piles onto the wagons, and they were transported over to the stationary thrashing machine, and then they were manually pitched into the machine, and it would be trashed. And then you had somebody that collected the thing would make cut the seeds off, and they would come out in a sack, and you'd sack them up, and then you'd tie up the sacks. The peanut, the greenery or whatever you want to call it, the bush, that would be spit out, and then later that was baled into hay, square bales of hay, and that was all done right there in the field, and took a lot of manpower. So all the neighbors would come and help, and that's how I used to work with the neighbors helping, and then when their crop was in, you went and helped them. And so this is a process of multiple people doing all this work, and there was a lot of activity, and all in all, the whole gist of the story is, as a 10-year-old, it was exciting because sometimes we got to drive the horses, and we didn't do much of the manual stuff as a kid, but my job was to tie the sacks up after peanuts were put into the sacks, and they were stacked in the field to continue drying again. You had to dry them real good. So once this process was done and everything was finished, everybody was so happy and exhausted. The person that was having the peanuts, excuse me, peanuts trashed, they were responsible for feeding everybody. And I remember as a kid, we never had bologna sandwiches, but that was what would be prepared for all the workers, and made a lunch with fresh tomatoes or whatever you had. And that was about the most exciting thing, was to be around all that and having a bologna sandwich, which was a treat to me.
So let me ask you, do you still eat bologna sandwiches?
I do from time to time, yeah. And but anyway, it was a lot of work, and it was dirty work because it was very dusty. And but we all survived.
Yeah.
So anyway, you got anything to add?
Just that my wife Dora grew up on a peanut farm, and her memories are, her dad wanted 5 boys and he ended up with 5 girls. But he would take them on the tractor with a wagon and drop them off in the field with their mom, and they would look at these acres and acres that they had to hoe the weeds, and they would say, how are we ever going to do this? And that's when it goes back to the old divide and conquer. Her mom would say, don't look at the end of the acreage, just look at the end of this row.
Yeah.
And before you know it, this row's finished, let's go on to the next row. But she spent hours and hours, and to this day, if she has a hoe in her hand, look out. She's really tough with that though.
She means business.
Yes, but yes, it was all a community effort. Everybody came to help everybody, and I think that's what's wrong with the world today.
Yeah,
We
I
don't,
agree.
we don't know our neighbors good enough. We don't spend enough time with the community. So.
Absolutely. Awesome.